Hello, everyone. Hope you're all well tonight. I'm certainly doing well, though I have to admit things in Washington are going slow. Oh, so slow. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Kay. Hi, Ghost Start. Hi, Dolores again. Thank you for sharing. Thank everybody who is going to share or who is sharing. I thank you for sharing. Steve says hi, Dolores and Kay. Kay says hi, Steve Wolfbrand. Steve says austerity. Ugh. Amber says good evening, my lovelies. Been watching the doc, says Kay. Wilmington on Fire. They did a great job with that. Steve Wolfbrand says good evening. Gee, Steve. Such a formal greeting. Okay. Let's get with it. There have been some activist things going on that I think we ought to give a little bit of attention to. First of all, in the foreign policy realm, something I mentioned briefly last night, the communists are now governing Chile. Javier Reyes, who's 31 years old, is the new mayor of the Santiago municipality of Lo Espejo in Chile. Quote, I grew up in a home where former president of Chile, Salvador Allende, was always the good guy, unquote, she told us. Quote, okay, and military dictator Augusto Pinochet was a tyrant. That marked my life, unquote. The Reyes comment reflects the old divides that have convulsed Chile's politics since General Augusto Pinochet's coup d'etat against former President Salvador Allende of the Popular Popular Unity Coalition on September 11th, 1973. Almost 50 years have gone by, and yet Chile is still influenced by the legacy of that coup and of the Pinochet dictatorship, which lasted from 1973 to 1990. 17 long years, maybe 18 long years. The May 2021 election that propelled Reyes to the mayor's office in Lo Espejo also voted in a new constitutional convention to rewrite the Pinochet-era Constitution of 1980. The Reyes victory and the gains made by the Left Alliance to shape a new constitution suggest that it is Allende's legacy that will shape the future and not that of Pinochet. Well, I certainly hope so, because Pinochet's legacy was a brutal one and one of inequality for Chile. Reyes is a member of the Communist Party of Chile, of the PCCH, which has rooted itself deeply in Chile's society over the past 109 years. The PCCH leader, Daniel Hadu, I guess his name would be pronounced, Evelina, I'm sure, will correct me, and I welcome the correction, will be the left's candidate in a presidential election to be held in November 2021. Hadu, like Reyes, is a mayor of a municipality in Chile's vast capital city of Santiago. The third of Chile's 18 million people live in Santiago. In the May 2021 election, he was re-elected to the mayoralty of Recoleta, which he has governed since 2012. Must be a pretty good mayor. Quote, there is a historical continuity in PCCH's policy, unquote. Hadu told us, quote, with the same horizon, updated, of course, no one is thinking of taking up statist projects again, or socialism as it has been tried. There is undoubtedly a historical continuity, and we are, in one way or another, participants in the dream of the people who in the 1970s sought to build a fairer country, and who today seek exactly the same thing. Hadu leads in the November 2021 general election polls to replace Chile's right-wing president, Sebastián Piñera. Already the press has started reporting about the various stances taken by Hadu during his life, particularly his association in the 1980s with Palestinian activism. The smearing of candidates of the left has become part of the electoral process in Latin America. The extreme right press in Ecuador said that the left-leaning candidate for president, Andrés Arauz, had taken money from the Colombian left-wing guerrilla group ELN, the National Liberation Army. The right-wing press also reported that Peru's current presidential candidate, Pedro Castillo, who was leading by a narrow margin, was similar to Sendero Luminoso, Shining Path, which is a guerrilla insurgency in Peru. Hadu dismisses these claims made against the left-wing candidates. I want my entire record to be visible because I have nothing to hide, Hadu said when he spoke to us. The communists participated in the elections held on May 15th and May 16th under the slogan, Vote Without Fear. Vota sin miedo. The slogan comes from a long history, which is part of the party's legacy. The PCCH was banned, and its members were subjected to persecution over 3 periods, 1927 to 1931, 1948 to 1958, 1973 to 1990. Pinochet's dictatorship killed thousands of communists, including many key leaders. A swath of Chile's society was gripped by fear which was brought about by Allende's socialism, which was essentially a result of the hatred cultivated during Pinochet's dictatorship. During this time, it takes courage to stand with the communists. Fear of communism has been diminishing, said Reyes, because the PCCH elected officials have shown their constituents both efficiency and compassion through their governance. Hadu's Recoleta has become a showcase with a municipal pharmacy, optical shop, bookstore, and record store, and an open university and real estate project, operating free of any profit motive under Hadu's vision as the mayor of the municipality. Javier Reyes says that her communism is rooted in her, quote, conception of a municipal government that starts with the universalization of rights and the capacity to create conditions for a good life, unquote. The project of a municipal socialism starts with, quote, health, education, and common spaces, unquote, says Reyes. It is a project that is, quote, democratic and open to the community. Unlike Chile's right-wing mayors, the communist mayors in Santiago, such as Reyes, Hadu, and Horacio Hassler, who was elected in May 2021 to the mayoralty of Santiago Centro, put the role of women at the core of their policies, including mechanisms to tackle violence directed against women. They want to create a society without fear in the broadest sense possible. In 2006, students across Chile protested the privatization of education. Their mass struggle was called the Penguin Revolution because of their black and white school uniforms. The Penguin Revolution in 2006 was my first introduction to politics. Reyes said. Reyes and Hassler both participated in the massive protests in 2011, 2013 over the inequalities that marked the secondary and university education in the country. Javier Reyes joined the PCCH during that period. Other students who are currently Chilean politicians, such as Camila Vallejo and Carol Cariola, as well as Hassler, were already communists. Student demonstrations came alongside manifestations and strikes by workers from all sectors. Their protests rattled the elite consensus, which since the fall of Pinochet in 1990 had not attempted to write a new constitution for the country or bothered to formulate a path out of neoliberal suffocation. In October 2019, high school students protested the rise of fares for public transport. This wave of protest, which is ongoing, began to define Chile's political life with the slogan, quote, it's not 30 pesos, it's 30 years, unquote. The students have highlighted the need for a new constitution. Now we have a new Chile. Chile has the lowest electoral participation rate in Latin America. After 17 years of dictatorship, trust in the state structures had practically disappeared. Voting was compulsory until 2009, although the registration to vote was not compulsory. And young people did not register with the Electoral Service. The demand for a new constitution was a wake-up call for the youth. Data shows that more than half of Chile's young people between 18 and 29 years of age voted in the election, with women constituting 52.9% of the voters. Women and young people will shape the Constitutional Convention, just as women and young women in particular, such as Reyes and Hassler, have taken over the mayor's offices. The 155-member Constitutional Convention is filled with young people like Reyes and Hassler, a sizable section of the left. The right wing was unable to win 1/3 of the convention, which would have given it veto power. This means that the new constitution will be drafted in the next 9 months which will be drafted in the next 9 months, will have a progressive character. On June 18th, Hadou faces a primary against Gabriel Boric, who's another student leader, and now a leader of the Frente Amplio Broad Front. All indications suggest that Hadou will prevail over Boric and then meet the candidates of the right in November. He will be the third communist to run for the presidency. Following Elias Leferet Gavino, 1931 and 1932, and also Gladys Marin, 1999. If the polls are accurate, Hadou will be the first communist president of Chile. This article was written by Vijay Prashad and Taroa Zuniga Silva. A very well-written article, and very illuminating and very hopeful as well. How long, though, will we have until the U.S. Actually makes an attempt? I'm sorry. I did share that with you. Good. I wasn't sure that I shared that with you. How long do we have to wait until we get some actions from the U.S. to try to overthrow what's going on, in Chile? I think we have to be ready for that. The reason why I think we have to be ready for it is we have to protest it. I think the Chileans have to be allowed to go their own way. All the indications is that these people who are taking over now in Chile are very good people, whatever political label they carry. They seem to be people who are interested in justice, people interested in equality, people interested in human rights, and education. In other words, people who are likely to be very good governors and very good leaders for that long-suffering country. For us, I have to say, hands off. Give them a chance. These are not the Stalinists of yore. They are not the Leninists of yore. They are a new form of communism. We have to keep our hands off. What they are doing internally is none of our business. We have to stop violating international law. Keep our hands off this process. Do something hopeful for a change. That's my message with respect to that form, of activism. Something good happened. It was a surprise. It was a surprise. It's about what happened in Buffalo. I spent some time in Buffalo from 1965 to 71. And Buffalo is where I met Bonnie and we got married. So I know Buffalo somewhat, and Bonnie knows it very, very well. Something great happened in Buffalo. And the goings-on was covered in Common Dreams. Here's a picture, of India Walton, a former nurse and community activist was the apparent victor in Buffalo's Democratic mayoral primary, beating four-term Mayor Byron Brown. Quote, "We are the workers," socialist India Walton declares victory in Buffalo mayoral race. Article was written by Julia Conley, their staff writer, dated June 23rd, 2021. New York's second largest city is poised next year to have its first socialist mayor after community activist and healthcare worker India Walton upset Byron Brown, the establishment Democratic leader who has run Buffalo for 4 years. Walton did not hesitate to embrace the label of socialist in the early morning hours Wednesday, as election results showed her, with 52% of the vote compared to Brown's 45%, with 92% of precincts reporting. "Oh, absolutely," unquote, Walton said quickly when a reporter asked if she would call herself a socialist. Quote, "The entire intent of this campaign is to draw down power and resources to the ground level and to the hands of the people," unquote. Boy, that's funny, isn't it? I always thought that was supposed to be the intent of Democratic campaigns, didn't you? To draw down power and resources to the ground level and to the hands of the people. That's democracy, isn't it? The former nurse, who had never run for public office before, added that the political establishment has embraced socialism for the wealthy for decades. Absolutely. Absolutely. "We will bail out Wall Street banks." Quote, "We will bail out Wall Street banks and give $1 billion in tax incentives to one of the richest people in the world to build empty Tesla factories in South Buffalo. And when it comes to providing the resources that families need to thrive, socialism becomes scary at that point," Walton said. Walton's campaign platform included plans to establish an unarmed public safety workforce, quote, "to address quality of life and social calls to 9/11, while directing police officers not to respond to mental health crises, establishing Buffalo as a sanctuary city, converting all city vehicles to electric cars within 4 years, and strengthening protections for tenants." Brown, a close ally of Governor Andrew Cuomo and the state party's preferred candidate, refused to debate Walton during the campaign and had not conceded defeat as of Wednesday morning. Walton's apparent victory was applauded by progressive New York Democrats, including Representatives Mondaire Jones and Jamal Bowman. In a tweet, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York, highlighted Walton's personal background as a teenage working mother and labor leader, period, at India Walton, BFLO for Buffalo, of course, became a mother at 14 years old. She earned her GED while pregnant with twins. She graduated, became a registered nurse, and then a representative in her union, which is 1199 SEIU, then directed a community land trust. Tonight, it seems Buffalo may be making her their mayor. Brandon Lewis says, 99% of precincts reporting Walton leads Brown. Pretty emotional moment for her. There's a picture of her. City and state political reporter Zach Williams said, okay, Walton's win was, quote, a huge victory for the political left. Although Democratic Socialists and progressive lawmakers support broadly popular policy proposals, including aggressive climate action, but Medicare for all, and other initiatives, which would place the needs of working people over the desires of corporations and the wealthy. Corporate Democrats and news personalities have persisted in claiming the party's left wing only have a chance of gaining a foothold in the country's largest coastal cities. Walton suggested her victory in Buffalo demonstrates that progressives' chances of winning all over the country. Quote, "This victory is ours," said Walton to her supporters. "It is the first of many. If you are in an elective office right now, you're being put on notice. We are coming," unquote. Quote, "We set out to not only change Buffalo, but to change the way progressive politics are viewed in upstate but New York," unquote. But she added, Walton is expected to win the general election in November in the heavily Democratic city, a victory that would make Buffalo the first major city to have a socialist mayor since 1960, when Milwaukee's Mayor Frank Zeidler stepped down. Senator Bernie Sanders, the former presidential candidate and the nation's most well-known Democratic socialist, served 8 years as the two-term mayor of Burlington, Vermont, the state's largest city from 1981 to 89. According to census data from 2007, Buffalo is the third poorest U.S. city with a population over 250,000, with 28.7% of people living at or below the poverty line. Of course, the population of Burlington, Vermont is far lower than 250,000. I can't remember it exactly, but I'd be surprised if the population of Burlington was over 50,000. So it's a very small city compared to Buffalo. Quote, "All that we are doing in this moment is claiming what is rightfully ours," Walton declared during her victory speech. "We are the workers, we do the work, and we deserve a government that works with and for us." Where did I see? I was sure that I saw a video here. I was sure there was a video accompanying this. Let me see. Perhaps I saw it on Twitter. Okay, here K is India Walton. Let's see if we've got it here. Nope, that's not a video. Let's see. See if I can find it. Okay, I wanted to play that video because there was such energy. This is it.
This victory is ours. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This victory is ours. It is the first of many. If you are in an elected office right now, you are being put on notice.
So we know Buffalo pretty well. And what I have to say about that is that I would never have thought, that that would have happened, okay, in Buffalo. It has been so controlled by machine politics for all of these years. In a declining city, things getting worse and worse for people in that city. It's just been terrible in that city. And seemingly no hope for anything turning around. This is the first bit of hope they've had. I have to say, if it can happen in Buffalo, then it can happen anywhere. Anywhere. We have to make it happen. And more activism. This time, in terms of reactions to what's been going on in the Congress. Here's a piece from Common Dreams. There's a picture of the activist group, Rise and Resist, and other organizations gathered at the steps of the public library in New York City on June 10th, 2021, okay, to demand an end to the filibuster. The filibuster must go. Senate GOP blocks debate on the voting rights bill. This one's by Jessica Corbett, staff writer, June 23rd, 2021. Voting rights advocates on Tuesday condemned Senate Republicans for blocking debate on the For the People Act, a sweeping pro-democracy bill, in a widely anticipated 50-50 vote that has bolstered arguments of the progressives for combating GOP obstruction by killing the filibuster. To be fair, Chuck Schumer planned that. He tried and succeeded in getting that vote because he knew that a public vote would put the pressure on Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And the Democrat-led House passed the version of the popular bill in March, although even Senator Joe Manchin, who refused to be a co-sponsor, voted with the rest of the Senate's Democratic caucus to advance the bill. It fell short of the 60 votes needed in the evenly divided chamber. Why, if Joe Manchin has refused to be a co-sponsor of the bill, did he not vote along with the Republicans? Because he didn't want to be seen as voting along with the Republicans. That would produce those very destructive ads and lots of questions, okay, from the reporters. So he voted with the rest of the caucus, as did Sinema, as Chuck Schumer knew they would. But the result of that was only to place the emphasis on and to highlight the filibuster, the power of the filibuster to stop any progress in the Senate. Quote, "Today, the Republican Party doubled down on its continued assault on American democracy and the Senate reverted back to some of its darkest days, unquote, declared the Move On executive director, Rania Epstein. Quote again, in the 50s and 1960s, senators used the filibuster to block historic civil rights and voting rights legislation. Today's vote proves that history does in fact repeat itself, unquote. Quote again, here is the plain truth. Our democracy is under daily attack from Republican forces seeking to destroy it for their own political gain. It started long before January 6th, and it has continued more than 6 months after the attack on the U.S. Capitol. Let's be clear. This is a 5-alarm fire. Quote, the Senate is broken, unquote, thanks to, quote, years of abuse and raw power grabs by Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and his GOP colleagues, and, quote, Democrats must fix it, unquote. Quote, we can no longer allow Mitch McConnell to use Jim Crow-era Senate procedures to stop those trying to fix it from doing so. Today's vote proves once and for all the filibuster must go. And now, before more damage can be done, unquote. These sentiments were shared by various advocates and elected officials, including federal lawmakers who tweeted fresh calls to end the filibuster. There's a tweet from Cori Bush here. The final line of that tweet is, the filibuster is destroying our democracy. Abolish it. There's a tweet from Bernie Sanders. There is no issue in front of Congress right now that is more critical for the future of our country than protecting the fundamental right of every American to vote. Now is the time for majority rule in the Senate. We must end the filibuster, pass sweeping voting rights legislation, and protect our democracy. And Pramila Jayapal said, first, voters delivered Democrats the House, the Senate, and the White House. Then Republican legislators responded by doing everything they can to suppress the vote. Now we need to stop them, end the filibuster, pass the For the People Act, and protect the voting rights. Don't forget, the John Lewis voting rights bill has to be passed as well. And not only that, but a new bill has been introduced into the Congress as well by a number of people trying to protect the state election officials from attacks by the state legislature, trying to restore the power of state election officials so they can be neutral when it comes to certifying elections, when it comes to counting the votes. A tweet from Elizabeth Warren, from Mitch McConnell, and the Senate Republican minority just used the filibuster to keep Congress from protecting our democracy. We cannot throw our democracy over a cliff in order to protect the Senate rule that isn't even part of the Constitution. Hashtag end of the filibuster. And a tweet from Ilhan Omar, simply, our democracy is more important than the Senate filibuster. Pass it on. And everybody ought to pass that on. Quote, the Senate's vote today to block debate on S1, the For the People's Act, demonstrates the vital need for Democrats to abolish the filibuster in the Senate, said patriotic millionaires Chair Morris Pearl. And quote again, the decision Democrats have in front of them is clear. Our nation is going to have either majority rule or permanent rule by the minority, unquote. Charlie Carter, executive director of Democracy Initiative, noted that, quote, the common sense voting protections, limits on partisan gerrymandering, and ethics reforms that are included in the For the People Act enjoy the overwhelming and majority support. But Republican senators today use the filibuster, a racist remnant of white supremacy, to deny black and brown and young people their right to vote. In doing so, they deny all Americans the inclusive democracy we deserve. It's a concrete example of why we must fix the Senate now to end partisan gridlock. And there were other comments of that sort as well. I'm not going to read them all. But Ed Markey had a tweet, on the subject, ending with, "Our very democracy is at stake. We have to abolish the filibuster." And there are other tweets, and other quotes here. And the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II tweeted Senator Manchin, "You couldn't get 10 GOP votes to even debate voting rights. So now, let's break the filibuster. Go to majority vote on the For the People Act, VRA, George Floyd Act, infrastructure, raising the minimum wage, and making permanent hashtag child tax credit, because it's all connected." And Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Jeff Merkley, the bill's lead sponsor in the upper chamber, vowed to keep on fighting. And I think they probably will, at least for a while. However, the article notes, without the support of conservative Democrats like Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, the party cannot abolish the filibuster. Alan Cialis, communications director for the Sunrise Movement, warned, quote, "Democracy is dying, and with Democratic control of the White House and Congress, Democrats have the power to revive it. We need to be clear. Any Democrat who voted against this legislation, and any Democrat lawmaker who still supports the filibuster, is complicit in the voter suppression that we know will happen next year." Quote, "Democrats need to learn. Voter suppression isn't just evil. It also jeopardizes their power. Republicans are only terrified of making the vote more accessible because they know suppression is how they maintain control. Democrats must abolish the filibuster and pass democracy reform immediately," she added, calling on President Joe Biden and Vice President Harris, who oversaw Tuesday's vote, to, quote, "use their bully pulpit in full force." And the Indivisible Guide tweeted, "We must pass the For the People Act by the end of July to ensure it's in effect for the midterms. It's time to eliminate the filibuster and pass real transformative democracy reform. And we must do so as soon as the Senate returns from its recess." That's where we come in. Individuals have what it takes to build a massive mobilization, show our senators we demand real change. And with Congress's 2-week-long recess starting in just a few days, it's the perfect time to make sure they hear us. And more of that. More of that. They will be hearing from us in the days ahead in their inboxes, on the phones, and at rallies across the country. Let us hope so. It is the time for activism. Now is the time. Okay. And today, there was some, hang on a second. I removed something that I wanted to cover. Here it is. There was a bit of activism on the Hill today as the Reverend William Barber II came to the Hill. Co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign is arrested by U.S. Capitol Police after taking part in a nonviolent protest in Washington, D.C. I was watching that for hours. There was absolutely no reason to arrest the Reverend Barber. It was all peaceful. There were no threats to anybody. It was a violation of the civil rights of Barber, and others. And I hope it costs D.C. a huge amount, of money. After rallying in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, this article was written by Jake Johnson, by the way, for Common Dreams today. After rallying in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, hundreds of low-wage workers, faith leaders, and advocates, including residents of West Virginia, Kentucky, and several other states, marched to the nearby Senate building to demand meetings with Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and Republican Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, two key opponents of the For the People Act. When their requests were denied, activists gathered in the street in front of the building and locked arms, briefly obstructing traffic before the U.S. Capitol Police dispersed the protest and arrested demonstrators. They would not respond to the people from their own state, said Poor People's Campaign co-chair, by Reverend Barber II, who was arrested during the protest. Quote, "We decided we had to take nonviolent, civil disobedient action. We're not violent. We're willing to take our penalty. And we're saying across this country, it's time for people, especially poor and low-wealth people and religious and moral leaders, to march on these Senate offices." And here's a video from the Poor People's Campaign. Sorry, I never did share that with you. Okay, so before the march on the Hart Senate building, rally attendees blasted Manchin and Republican senators for opposing legislation that would shield the franchise from hundreds of GOP-authored voter suppression bills that have been introduced in advance in states across the country. "We're not going away," declared one West Virginia resident who traveled to the nation's capital to take part in Wednesday's demonstrations, which came 1 week after West Virginians marched on Manchin's state office to demand that the senators support the original For the People Act. In front of the U.S. Supreme Court, Barber delivered a characteristically fiery speech accusing Republican lawmakers of launching a, quote, "a political insurrection against voting rights," and warned, quote, "the same people that suppress the vote will suppress your living wages," unquote. "There is nothing moderate about using a non-constitutional filibuster to block protecting and expanding the constitutional right to vote," unquote. Barbara said, referring to the 60-vote rule that Mitch McConnell has repeatedly wielded to block Democratic priorities, and that Joe Manchin has defended. Quote, not one Democrat ran last year and said, if you elect me, I'm going to join the Republicans in their interposition and but nullification, unquote. And quote again, the Republicans have demonstrated that they don't believe there's a problem. So how can you compromise with people who don't believe they have a problem? But Jesse Jackson was at the Poor People's Campaign as well. And here's another brief video from Periscope on that. Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can share that.
Beginning with the Reverend, and I say Senior Elder Jesse Louis Jackson, and others that I will call Council of President, General Secretary of the National Council of Churches, and others, because we are clear. And maybe it's right to start as people are still marching here. Because one of the things we're trying to say today is time to start marching for the soul of this democracy. And we are saying to others there needs to be a wave after wave after wave. In the state, on these senators' offices, and in the Capitol. And in another couple of weeks, Poor People's Campaign, National Call for Moral Revival, are going to ask our 40 coordinating committees across the nation to have a National Moral Monday on these Senate offices. We had planned to take off after we had our National Poor People's Low-Wage Workers Assembly Moral March on Washington virtually, launching a plan to have a National Poor People's Assembly Moral March on Washington on June of 2022. But there comes a time, Sister Arwine, there comes a time, Reverend Jackson, there comes a time, President Winkler, that you can't wait to save something. You got to save it while saving is possible. And so today we are here, turn this mic up some, we are here with people from the hood to the hollers in Kentucky and West Virginia. And we're here with friends from other places to demand of every U.S. Senator and to ask them to answer one simple question. Which side are you on? This is no time for straddling the fence. Yesterday's party line vote to kill debate on the For the People Act certified what we already knew. McConnell's obstructionist caucus as politically mean, extreme, regressive, and anti the Constitution, anti the very Constitution they swore to uphold. Officially, somebody said that they proved that they were the party against voting rights, but we've already known that. We didn't need a procedural vote to prove that to us, and neither did America. They are trapped in the lies of McConnell's meanness and are held captive by money and the forces of greed that have been reshaping them since the Southern strategy of Richard Nixon. But let me be clear, why we're here and why you see black and white and brown and indigenous and Asian and young and old and gay in the street. This is not simply Jim Crow. This is James Crow Esquire. It's not just targeting black people, but it's targeting poor and low-wage black, white, brown, indigenous, Asian, young people, and the disabled. And the question is, which side are you on? This refusal to even debate voting rights protections has exposed every citizen Republican as a liar. That they lied when they put their hands on that Constitution. They stood before God and their constituents and swore to uphold the Constitution. But they have embraced the states' rights argument against federal voting rights protections that if followed to its furthest conclusion would inevitably invalidate the very vision and promise of the 15th, 19th, 24th, 26th, and 14th Amendment. Which side are you on? And today we come here not as Democrats or Republicans, but we come here to speak the moral truth, because sometimes you just need a few people that don't play the political games, they just tell it like it is. And so we're not just here to talk to McConnell. We asked them for meetings to meet with their constituents. We've been asking, they refuse. We haven't heard anything from them. So we're also here to say to Manchin and any so-called Democrat who claims to support the non-constitutional filibuster over the constitutional guarantee that no state can deny or abridge the right to vote. When you do this and you support the non-constitutional filibuster over a constitutional guarantee, you are assisting the Republicans in their extremism. And you are engaging in a form of political manipulation and gamesmanship that have gone on long enough. And to then lie and say you're doing it because of the people in your state. West Virginians called us and said we need to march in West Virginia and in D.C. because 79% of West Virginians, Republicans and Democrats and independent, have long said stop the filibuster, pass the bill, and pass the Voting Rights Act. This battle is for the fundamental promise and principle of voting, and it should always be non-negotiable. In fact, the truth of the matter is, think about it, what's in the For the People's Act. The For the People's Act would restore voting rights to millions of formerly incarcerated people and mandate safeguards for voters who lack identification and prohibit discriminatory purges and affirm the necessity of restoring the Voting Rights Act and prohibit and further penalize voter intimidation, deception, and online vote suppression. Who wants to compromise that away? This bill would expand voting opportunities and modernize our voting registration system with automatic same-day and online voter registration, giving all voters the option to vote early in person or by mail, limiting time in line at polling places, and provide additional protection to voters with disabilities. Who would want to compromise away from that? This bill would outlaw extreme partisan gerrymandering and establish critical guidelines for the drawing of congressional districts in a manner that promotes fair representations and protects people of color and communities that are often underrepresented. It would bring the redistricting process to the public view. It would end the practice of prison-based gerrymandering, which undercuts the representation of communities of color and poor communities. Who would want to compromise away from that? The For the People Act would blunt the political effects of wealth inequality, most notable by establishing a voluntary small dollar matching system for federal congressional races, and it would blunt the power of dark money and curb these super PACs. Who would want to block this or compromise this away unless you were more committed to the United States Chamber of Commerce than the United States Constitution? Who would want to stop this or compromise away from it unless you were more committed to systemic racism and classism than justice and democracy? This battle is not about moderate versus conservative. It's not about left versus right. It's about right versus wrong. Not one of those senators put your hand on the Bible and swore to moderately support the Constitution. You did not swear to conservatively support the Constitution. You did not swear to moderately establish justice or to moderately promote the general welfare or to conservatively ensure against the denial and the abridgment of voting rights. No. And in the Bible, if you held the Bible while you swore, the Bible does not say be moderate for justice, be moderate and lukewarm. It says in Isaiah 10, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their rights and make women and children their prey. There is nothing moderate about using a non-constitutional filibuster to block protecting and expanding the constitutional right to vote. No. If you try to block this or compromise this, it is morally indefensible, constitutionally inconsistent, economically insane, politically irresponsible, and historically inaccurate. Not one Democrat ran last year and said, if you elect me, I'm going to join the Republicans in their interposition and nullification. Don't run and say one thing and then get in office and do another. The possibility of compromise has to be based on a shared promise. You come to the table with people who believe there's a problem that needs to be addressed. But the Republicans have just demonstrated they don't believe there's a problem. You hear them coming, don't you? You hear them coming. That's how it's going to be all this summer. You hear them, don't you? They don't even believe that we have a problem. So how can you compromise with people who don't believe they have a problem? They have capitulated to the lies of a president who lost. And they have capitulated to a past rooted in the legacy of the Strom Thurmond and the Southern Strategy. They have sided with the corporately funded think tanks. 6 months after the Capitol was stormed by insurrectionists who wanted to overturn the results of an election, they have decided and declared that they are on the side of political insurrection, and they are attempting to do it in our face, and it's gone on long enough, and it needs to stop now. So we've come to ask a simple question. Which side are you on? I was talking to my friend as I closed, who used to work for Strom Thurmond. He was raised in the hills of Appalachia, and now he is a powerful brother for justice, Jonathan Hargrove. And he said to me this morning, trying to compromise with Republicans now would be thinking that you could convince the crowd that wanted to hang Mike Pence to just settle for tar and feathers. We've come here today to say there's some things that are non-negotiable. Am I right about it? You've got to decide which side are you on. When we read Manchin's compromise proposal last week, it didn't say anything about federal reenfranchisement of formerly incarcerated people. It didn't say anything about modernizing. It talked about a voter ID. Why would we nationalize voter ID while civil rights lawyers are in court fighting to stop voter ID? You can't say you honor the legacy of John Lewis, who wrote the For the People Act. Let's be clear. John Lewis wrote the For the People Act. That's his bill. So how can you say you honor him and he wrote it with his blood and his life, and then you try to undermine the very bill he wrote? And so as they come, we are here today because we understand that the fight for voting rights cannot be separated from the fight for health care and living wages and infrastructure that reaches to poor and low-wealth communities. It's all one fight. The same people that suppress the vote, they'll suppress your living wages. They suppress health care. They suppress public education. They are the same people that would rather put dark money into the voting process rather than let us see what they're doing in the light. And it's time to rise to meet the moral crisis of our time, forego the filibuster and pass the For the People Act and pass the Voting Rights Act. It's time for a 50 vote with the vice president breaking the filibuster. It's time to debate and pass the For the People Act. And look, while they're doing it, go ahead on with 50 plus 1 and pass $15 an hour living wage. Go ahead and pass infrastructure reform. Go ahead and pass health care. Go ahead and pass more access to unions. In fact, go ahead and pass what's best for the democracy, and we'll battle it out at the ballot box next year. Now, there's still time for McConnell to repent. I have to say that as a preacher. But imagine, don't you let sin block the salvation of this democracy and its soul. And so, brothers and sisters, as Robin comes now, we must bring moral direct action. We must make sure we're clear and heard. All over this country, America, you should be marching on these Senate offices. You should be bringing buses to D.C. COVID safe. We don't need an insurrection. We just need a moral, nonviolent mobilization and direct action. Back in Appalachia, Mother Jones used to say, we've got to pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living. It's time to fight like nonviolent. It's time to fight like truth. It's time to fight like love. It's time to fight like justice. And we need to fight until hell freezes over and then fight on the ice. It's time for moral direct action. We don't need compromise and capitulation. Pass the bill. Break the filibuster. Pass voting rights. Pass living wages. Pass health care. Do what's right for the American people and do it for poor and low-wealth people and do it now.
Okay, so you got the message loud and clear. Loud and clear. He's going to try to mobilize the whole country behind the Poor People's Campaign and getting rid of the filibuster. We'll see how successful he is. But he is pretty persuasive. Now note that as prominent Democrats, such as former Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams and former President Obama, expressed support for Joe Manchin's counteroffer. The counteroffer, he released a memo outlining a compromise version of the legislation that would strip out several of its major provisions and add a voter ID requirement. Stacey Abrams and Obama expressed support for that counteroffer, an abrupt shift away from years of Democratic opposition to voter ID mandates. And you heard Reverend Barber, quote, "Why would we nationalize voter ID while civil rights lawyers are in court trying to stop the voter ID," unquote. Yes, he's right. There are some things that are non-negotiable. That are non-negotiable. We don't need compromise and capitulation. Quoting now, pass the bill, break the filibuster, pass voting rights, pass living wages, pass health care. Do what's right for the American people and do it for poor and low-wealth people and do it now. And you can watch the whole thing on YouTube. There's a link there. You can watch it, okay, on YouTube. So, on to the austerity context. On to the austerity context. Let me share the screen again. From Counterpunch, the $50 trillion question, What is Austerity? By Richard Moser, June 18th, 2021. The Billboard, austerity isn't working. And this was a billboard in Britain. Britain's better off with the alternatives. The modern system of austerity took shape in the mid-1970s, and we are still in its grip, not only in Britain, here. Austerity is meant to trap us in a destructive double bind. The race to the bottom for millions of people is also the race to the top for the few. The cost, more than $50 trillion. The human cost in misery, death, and despair, devastating yet uncounted. The deliberate creation of poverty and scarcity was necessary for the corporations to consolidate their power. It did not just happen on its own. Austerity required far-reaching structural changes in the U.S. economy. Beginning in the 1970s, the reforms of the New Deal and Great Society were gradually gutted, and the economy was recast to suit corporate demands. Biden's corporate-centered, temporary, and incremental approach won't touch austerity. Biden promises a small fraction of what is needed and will not reverse the wage cuts at the core of austerity. The major parties will not reform the corporate system that enforced austerity in the first place. Instead, they aim to defend it. How do we know this? We know this because Biden had Schumer, at Manchin's insistence, strip the $15 an hour minimum wage, which in itself wasn't even a living wage, out of the American Rescue Plan. That was as big a signal as we're going to get. And as I've said here many times, the progressives in the House folded in relation to that. I think what you have to do is refresh your screen and it will come back. So, we know by Biden's actions and by the actions of Schumer, who basically listens to Biden right now, we know that it's unlikely that Biden is going to reverse the wage cuts at the core of austerity. Austerity is the big lie, quote, we are broke, unquote, when the big truth is the economy is rigged and inequality is the result. How do we know that's the big lie? Because we know the United States is a monetary sovereign and has been since 1971. We know there is no limit to what we can pay for. We can pay for anything we need to pay for to create generalized prosperity in our society. And the quote, we are broke, which, by the way, is a quote from Obama, too, that is a big lie. Donald Trump wasn't the only one to tell a big lie. Now, Barack Obama told a big lie, too. When the big truth is the economy is rigged and inequality is the result. Austerity is when the ruling class gets most of everything society produces, leaving the people with less than they can live on. To bridge that gap, the bosses and bankers substitute high interest consumer debt for decent wages, not just decent wages, decent Social Security payments, not simply decent wages. Austerity is the opposite of economic democracy. It is the dictatorship of big money. Contrary to corporate propaganda, austerity is the opposite of free markets too. It is the result of planned policy decisions made by corporations and government. Richard Moser is right on here. Austerity is a core feature of neoliberal policy and the forefather of the recent fascist revival. Both the overt, vulgar fascism of the extreme right and the covert, systematic fascism of corporate power, empire, and the police state. Austerity was the, quote, solution, unquote. The big capital devised to maintain profits in the short run. In the long run, austerity only intensified the crisis. In this context, both the powerful and the powerless are drawn towards the other, quote, fix, unquote, for the mess that austerity and corporate power created. Fascist-style politics. Austerity serves many purposes to those in power. Enforced despair was a political weapon and is a political weapon, people, as well as an economic one, keeping us all so busy surviving that we must struggle with all of our might to contest power or to address the really big issues like war and climate change. While austerity reigns at home for workers, the U.S. has the largest and most expensive war machine in world history, including a domestic cop army that ranks third among global military expenditures, while the class of billionaires possesses wealth too vast to even imagine. Austerity is not the lack of money. It's a statement of priorities. And those priorities are protecting the ruling class with the military force necessary to maintain order abroad and at home, and to distract and demobilize everyday people. Money talks and money says they are going to double down. Austerity is social control. And the graphic tells the tale. Our U.S. defense expenditures are $731 billion, but after China, our police have the third biggest expenditures in the world. I can't see that number very well, but looks like it's 118 billion. We dwarf the expenditures of all the other nations. What we spend on police dwarfs the defense budget of the UK, dwarfs the defense budget of France. It is incredible. The long-term results of the redistribution of wealth are absolutely mind-boggling. A Rand Corporation report found that 50 trillion was redistributed from the bottom to the top. That's a report from a think tank, an establishment think tank that serves the mighty and the powerful. And yet it estimates that 50 trillion was redistributed from the bottom to the top since the mid-70s. It's hard to grasp just how profound that is and just how vicious the class struggle waged by the owning class has been. According to Time, another organ of the establishment, on average, extreme inequality is costing the median income full-time worker about $42,000 a year. Adjusted for inflation using the CPI, the numbers are even worse. Half of all full-time workers now earn less than half what they would have had incomes across the distribution continue to keep pace with economic growth. According to Business Insider, the median college-educated American worker would have seen their annual pay double without this theft. I am a PhD. I have no idea how much my pay would have doubled during this particular period of time. The extreme exploitation is a systematic form of violence that results in suicide, premature death, and disease. It's organized class warfare. According to a major study of life expectancy between 1951 and 2017, by 2014, the midlife mortality was increasing across all racial groups caused by drug overdoses, alcohol abuse, suicides, and a diverse list of organ system diseases, unquote. The report cited by David Rosen and Counterpunch continued, during the half century between 1959 and 2016, Americans' life expectancies increased by nearly 10 years. Sadly, since then, the average lifespan slowly declined. There's been an increase in death rates among working-age Americans. This is an emergent crisis, and it is a uniquely American problem since it is not seen in other countries. Something about life in America is responsible. The exceptional, quote, uniquely American problem, unquote, is the extreme stress of extreme poverty not experienced in other wealthy countries. This is how the ruling class maintains control here in the imperial core. Yet there is so much hoarded treasure that $21 trillion is stashed away in tax havens around the world that allow the very richest to legally avoid taxation. So when the bosses say we don't have money, you better believe they mean, quote, we don't have money for you, unquote. Biden will not recover the $50 trillion heist. Why? Because the Democrats, sorry excuses for reform, avoid the main culprit, wage suppression. There is that. But there is another point that is very important here. Biden has the power to bring more than $50 trillion into the public purse right now. Enough to change radically the economic system in the United States, provided Congress does the appropriations, of course. But as we know, if $100 trillion is sitting in the Treasury spending account, the public purse, there will be great pressure on senators and Congress people to begin to appropriate money for the millions and millions of people who will appear in Washington to pressure them to appropriate money at long last for what people want and need. Going on with the article. Wage suppression and the attack on workers and our unions are at the heart of this epic theft. It all began with a set of structural reforms designed to break the direct link between productivity and compensation that was forged by working class struggles during and after the Great Depression and World War II. And you know the productivity graph and how it shows the great gap between the increase in productivity and the increase in hourly compensation. Hourly compensation only going up by 115.14%, whereas productivity goes up by 241.8%. Wage suppression creates austerity. If we cannot change wages, the rest is tinkering around the edges. What we all know to be true, the article points up, $15 an hour was visionary when first proposed. Now it is just a new substandard minimum wage, and we can't even get that. The failure of the Democrats to live up to that often-made promise is a proof that decent wages will not be won inside the existing political order. Both major parties are sold to the highest bidder, and union officials aren't even at the table, despite decades of being loyal Democrats. If labor was truly, quote, at the table, would the Democrats have gotten away with a cheap trick like hiding behind the parliamentarian to kill $15 an hour? This is not just an insult to every union member, but a signal that beyond a few stimulus crumbs, the war on the poor continues. Not only aren't workers at the table, they are behind bars. The system of slave-like prison labor is a ball and chain driving down labor costs, also eliminating real jobs, and weakening labor unions. Unions once understood this threat and fought against it. Now, nary a word. Austerity and the wage suppression it is founded on will not end as long as prisoners are worked like slaves. Now more than ever, working class solidarity, both within and outside of the formal labor movement, is the best way forward. Organizing and the threat of strike, including a general strike, is infinitely more valuable than standard ways of lobbying politicians. Since low wages lie at the heart of the austerity regime, then workers are at the heart of the solution. To protect the right to organize, PRO Act does contain many important reforms, like the abolition of the right to work laws. The most potentially useful reforms are the legalization of spur-of-the-moment strikes, unpredictable on-again, off-again strikes, slowdowns while at work, and secondary boycotts that allow unions to call boycotts against anyone they choose. All these powerful tactics were prohibited by the 1947 and still enforced Taft-Hartley Act, one of the first reforms, quote-unquote, that paved the way to austerity. But to pass PRO and realize its promise will take an aroused and independent-minded working class. We lost the class struggle the last 4 decades in part because we laid down our best weapon. We failed to negotiate by abandoning the class struggle in favor of collaboration with the bosses. The increase in strikes since 2018 means the fight is on again, and that's the real reason unions feel confident enough to advance national labor law reform like the PRO Act. I have to mention here, Taft-Hartley was passed in 1947 after the Republicans were elected in 1946. They held the Congress for 1947 and 48, but the election of 1948 returned Democrats to the control of Congress. They did a number of things, some of which were fairly good things. But in 1949 and 1950, they did nothing about the Taft-Hartley Act, except that Truman used it to break a steel strike. He used the Taft-Hartley Act rather than repealing the Taft-Hartley Act. It could have been repealed in the period 1949 to 1950. But he broke a strike with it, and he went to war in Korea. He went to war in Korea in order to defend us against communism. He got the UN to do a police action in Korea. And people forgot about repealing Taft-Hartley. And of course, when the Republicans took over and Eisenhower became president, he wasn't about to repeal Taft-Hartley. And even when Kennedy came in again during the early 1960s, there was very little pressure to repeal Taft-Hartley back then. Why wasn't it repealed in the Kennedy-Johnson administration? Why not? Labor gave them very, very strong support, and it was still very strong then. But they did not go to the mat and insist on repeal of Taft-Hartley. And that's in part what has led to the debacle we see today. The chart misses many small strikes, but does show that the period of relative economic democracy relied on strikes and dramatic drop-off in the number of large strikes from the mid-1970s until 2018. Approximately 1,300 strikes by essential workers of all kinds, including prisoners, have occurred since the pandemic began. Many strikes were self-organized outside of official union channels. Is this the shape of class struggles to come? Can the union movement be reborn? Only if we make it so. Austerity. What about austerity from the MMT point of view? From the MMT point of view, there are two types of austerity. One is macroeconomic austerity. What that refers to is fiscal policy that leaves the private sector with a reduction in net financial assets year by year, which was the policy followed by Bill Clinton from roughly 1997 until he left the presidency in 2001, and for some of the Bush years as well. A sectoral balance analysis shows that there were continual losses by the private sector, given the distribution of power within the private sector and the increasing power of capitalist organizations and large businesses. What was happening was that those net profits that were going to the private sector were distributed in such a way that very little was going to the middle class and to the poor people, creating microeconomic austerity. Microeconomic austerity is what you see when you look at each of the industries within the private sector, and you look at the shares that go to the industries and to the households, and you see that in each industry, it's the big businesses, the businesses with oligopolistic or monopolistic control that keep getting the rewards, and the families and the small businesses that keep on losing money. That is microeconomic austerity. And what Moser was talking about in his article was mostly microeconomic austerity. And the result of that has been the redistribution of wealth in our society and the increasing disappearance of the middle class and the increasing precarity of the working class that we have all seen over the years. Well, I've run a little bit over, but I will now go. Thank you for staying. I notice a good many of you are staying. And so that's good. Steve Wolfman says austerity, ugh. Steve Wolfman says good evening. Carmen says, are you eating huckleberries, Joe? Hi, how are you? Glad you're feeling well. Washington is frustrating. I'm about to go Hulkamanic myself. Thank you, Carmen. And Steve Wolfman said, watch the doc AlphaGo on YouTube. Very good about artificial intelligence. Free on YouTube. I'm not sure what that is, Steve. Please leave a link. Lana says, hi all. Don't forget to hit the like button and share and the subscribe button. Like, share, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And if you're on Facebook, like, share, and follow. Kate Clark Ryan says, I lived in the Wilmington area for over 20 years, so this one was personal. Steve Wolfbrand said, chilly today, hot tamale, Mexican weather report. Steve Wolfbrand says, yes, we have a Wilmington here as well. It's in California. Kay says, we have one in Ohio too, but Wilmington, North Carolina was a city before we were a country. History there is amazing. Steve Wolfbrand says, indigenous, question mark. And Steve Wolfbrand says, Allende was murdered by our government. Don't get me started. Yes, I know he was. And his government was doing such interesting things to improve the situation for Chile. It was the first really major application of general systems theory. They were doing great things there. And when Pinochet came in, he brought in the Chicago School of Austrian Economics. It was Milton Friedman and his boys. And they just created this extreme inequality over a period of years because that's the way they liked it. It was neoliberal murder, not just of Allende, but all sorts of people in Chile over the years. Ghostart says that Mr. McAfee did not kill the radio star. I certainly doubt that he did. Kay says, no, just a port city used by us before the American Revolution. And Steve Wolfbrand said, the A in Santiago is short, Doc. Short, Santiago. Santiago. Santiago? Isn't it Santiago? Steve says, I spent time in Brazil and Venezuela. Things are different down there. They're very different in Venezuela, aren't they? Jeffrey Denton says, but my guess is NGOs are already there. And Steve Wolfbrand says, looks like Buffalo is getting a socialist mayor, finally a win on the scoreboard. Steve Wolfbrand says, don't get me started, sorry. Ghostart said, but they elected a terrorist and sends an icon, which I can't see in my interface, but which I'm sure is sarcastic. Steve Wolfbrand says, yes, we are the ones who do the fucking work. Steve Wolfbrand says, God bless her. Kay says, I didn't realize Buffalo was the second largest city in the state. Yeah, it is the second largest city. The third largest city is Rochester. And if I remember correctly, the fourth largest city is Albany. Or maybe it's Binghamton. Could be Binghamton is the fourth largest city. They might have 100,000 in Binghamton or so. And Carmen Yunus says, but listening to Ms. Walton is giving me surges of energy from the cosmos. Yeah, that's what I thought too. I thought the whole movement there to get her in has tremendous energy. I hope they join in the national Poor People's Campaign. We really need that. Steve Wolfbrand said, Amazon is destroying everything not sold. People could use that shit. Disgusting. Kay says, I saw that report, Steve Wolfbrand. Yes, I saw it on Rising. Steve Wolfbrand said, not Rising, I'm sorry, on Breaking Points. Of course, there's very little good on Rising anymore. Steve Wolfbrand says, well, Buffalo isn't very big, but you can shuffle off to there. It's gotten smaller over the years. It used to be larger. It's gotten very suburbanized. The metro area is still fairly sizable. There was a lot of white flight there out to the suburbs.
Solar power there.
Huh?
They're doing a lot of solar power there.
But Barney says they're doing a lot of solar power in Buffalo these days. And Buffalo has been desperately trying to revitalize itself since we met there in the middle 1960s. They were involved in a campaign to boost Buffalo back then, because Buffalo was in decline in the 1960s. That was 55 years ago. They've been trying ever since. They've done everything. They've thrown everything against the wall, and nothing sticks. Carmen Yunus, ooh, there it is again. Hallelujah. Steve Wolfbrand says, Kashama needs to be in higher office. Steve says, exactly. We do the work. We deserve what's ours. God bless that woman. Steve Wolfbrand, this victory is ours. Unashamed socialist. Ghost Star, who's inciting democracy? Viva India, Steve Wolfbrand says. Carmen says, I'll take socialism over fascism anytime. Well, there's socialism, okay, and there's fascism, but I'm not sure what the labels mean anymore. I'm pretty sure what fascism means, but I'm not sure what socialism means now. The reason why I'm not sure what socialism means is because if you look at the kinds of policies the people who proudly say, I'm a Democrat socialist, the kinds of policies they favor, all I see is modernized New Deal policies. Basically, a bigger and better and modernized version of the New Deal. Of course, the Republicans used to call that socialist back then, but most of the country didn't think so. Steve Wolfbrand says, Viva Nina Turner. And Kay says, huge protest in D.C. today by several Poor People's Party. Was great. It was the Poor People's Campaign that had the protest. And Steve Wolfbrand says, but Bernie never mentions the political revolution anymore. Steve, he's got an organization called Our Revolution. He's sending notifications under that label all the time, asking people to do this and do that. Steve says Bernie can fuck off. Kay says he turned it over to Our Revolution group. Who runs our revolution? Really, right now, who runs our revolution? Who's the chairperson of the board of our revolution? Who? Obsidian says Democrats, Party of Slavery, KKK, Jim Crow, FDR segregation, FDR Japanese internment camps, lynching, poll taxes, Margaret Sanger eugenics, Planned Parenthood, and voted against women's rights. Yeah, but a lot of that is very ancient history. And by the way, a lot of good things were done by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Yes, there was still segregation under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. There was the FDR Japanese internment camps, but there were also a lot of great programs and a persistent attempt to change our society. And the final statement just before he died of the Economic Bill of Rights, if he had not died, if he had continued, he certainly would have pushed for the Economic Bill of Rights. Steve Wolfbrand says, I don't know much about the filibuster, but that Jimmy Stewart movie was stupid. Mr. Smith goes to Washington? Yeah, right. Kay says, that is the way the filibuster used to be, Steve Wolfbrand. Well, people standing up, Kay, and doing the filibuster, yeah. But it was never used for the people, as in Mr. Smith goes to Washington. It was almost always used for Jim Crow. Steve Wolfbrand said, does the barber go to Mansion's mansion to cut his hair? A good question. And Ghost Start says, at Nina Turner, I'm proud to receive the backing of Congressman Ted Lieu. Joe Biden has nominated Cindy McCain to be a UN ambassador. Oh, wonderful. Why did he just go the whole way and nominate Meghan McCain to be the UN ambassador? Oh, God. Kay says, the Reverend Barber started his protest in 2010 when North Carolina went red for the first time in many years. Yes, I know. He's been at it a long time. Kay says, I love the Rev. Carmen says, say it, Speaker. Call them the fascists that they are. Steve Wolfbrand says, Yang is out of the Palestinian thing. I'll tell you, Steve, I'm glad that Yang is out. I never trusted Yang. I just thought from the beginning that the guy was a neoliberal swine. That is what I thought. Carmen says, end neoliberalism. If the shit hits the fan, that the Molotov cocktail is very effective. You only need a beer bottle, a rag, and some gasoline. Ghost Start said, today is World Whistleblower Day. Hashtag World Whistleblower Day. And that's another symbolic and empty gesture. Kay says Obama sucks. He does. He just really sucks. He sucks all the time. He can't get over sucking. He must have been born sucking.
Joey.
Carmen Muniz says, Senator McConnell and the rest of the obstructionists aren't going to give a flying fuck about what they swore to uphold. As Reverend Barber can't plead with them. He's got to put them on the spot. That's right. That's what he's doing. He's putting them on the spot. That's exactly what it's about. Gorstadt says we're a week away from mass evictions. And Joe, quote, at least he has empathy. Biden is using COVID relief to fund another pandemic. Police violence. Steve Wolfbrand says, Doc, we are both at the end of our game. But I'm like you. I'll fight this shit to the very end. Yes, I will. I'm with you, Steve. Fight to the very end. Kay says, life in America sucks. Steve says, the only billionaire I like, Kay, is Elon. But we need to go to Mars. But this planet is crashing fast. But Steve,
There's no air there.
okay, it's already crashed on Mars. I mean, Mars has already crashed. It's already lost a lot of its atmosphere. We got to fix this planet. Okay, as far as Elon is concerned, he may be worse than Bezos. He's in a competition with Bezos for who's worse. Kay says austerity kills. Steve Wolfbrand said, go, sorry. Ghostart says 184 countries vote to demand an end to the U.S. blockade in Cuba. Yes, I saw that. Okay, adopting the UN resolution. Only the United States and Israel voted against. Yes, Israel has to vote in the UN the way we want it to vote. Otherwise, we won't vote in the way they want us to vote. That's the trade. Steve says, when I was a kid, most people were union workers. Now, Matt, 20%. I don't know. Kay says, life in this country has been going downhill sharply in my whole adult life. I'm 68. I suppose I date at the time when it started going downhill. Actually, from Nixon's election in 1968. And Steve says, perhaps 20%. Sorry. Steve says, damn, spell check sucks. And invite on Facebook, says Carmen Yunus. Yes, invite. And Steve says, well, Doc seems very healthy and smart. That's good. And Druzy said something, which I can't see in the interface I have. Carmen says, do you miss New York? But do I miss New York? Well, okay. I left New York to go to college when I was 16. I would come back periodically for short periods of time after that. But when I graduated from college, okay, after demonstrations out in California and protests and stuff like that, okay, I went to graduate school in the fall of 1960. That was out, okay, in Michigan State. And I rarely have been back to New York since then. Okay, I did go back to Buffalo, and we would visit New York from time to time. In 1971, we went to Boston, but for a brief period, and then we went to Binghamton, New York. We enjoyed ourselves in Buffalo, okay, and in Binghamton, but we really haven't been back to New York for any lengthy period of time. I haven't been since I was 16. I'm 82 now. That's a long time. In some ways, I'm still a New Yorker, but in many other ways, I'm just not. Ghosta said, Rick Wiles hospitalized with COVID after saying it's God's judgment against LGBTQ and Jewish people. Well, okay. I'm not going to make a comment on that. Carmen Rena says, I learned a little known fact about solar. Solar traps CO2 in the atmosphere as well. I wish I would have saved the article because it could have been pro-fossil fuel propaganda. It could have. Lana says, I love Bernie giving Meghan McCain what for in a video I saw today. Haha. Steve Wolpert says, FDR the GOAT, the greatest of ever. Palana says, agreed on Yang. No thanks. Take your UBI and shove it. Steve Wolfbrand said, the greatest of all fucking time. He was. He was the greatest of all fucking time. Carmen says, the Mars is here now. In a way. Steve says, Doc, what do you think of the Joe Rogan experience? I don't actually watch Joe Rogan very much, but when I have watched him, when he interviewed Bernie, I thought he was a great interviewer, and the interview, was a great interview. I've seen him a couple of times since then, and most recently in the interview with Sagar and Crystal, and I thought that was a very nice but two-way conversation. I think Joe Rogan is really tremendously intelligent and commonsensical, and I kind of like him. I think he's an honest man. And Lana Dell says, Elon, you like him? Yuck! Let him and Bezos launch themselves permanently into space. Good riddance. Take Bill Gates too. And Warren Buffett. Take Warren Buffett too. I say take Warren Buffett too. I think Warren Buffett's a big hypocrite. And take Larry Ellison while you're doing it. And Carlos Slim. Take them all on the same spaceship. Export them to Mars. And Kay says, I want to go to Cuba. Garstad says, Jim Backer agrees to pay $156,000 for claiming silver solution could cure the coronavirus. He should have agreed to pay $156 billion for claiming a silver solution could cure the coronavirus. What an nincompoop. Steve Wolfbrand said, I'm going to shuffle off to Buffalo. That should be very interesting. Kay says, pick me up on the way, Steve Wolfbrand. And KRTD Media says, you can now catch Morning Joe Firestone rewinds and KRTD Media weekday mornings at 10 a.m. until 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you, Shane. Thank you for that little message from Shane Coughlin. And by the way, you will also find me there. I sort of, while I'm working on other things, I sort of tune into the comment thread there. And I will answer questions and comments. I can't do it verbally, but I'll do it in the comment thread. And if you use the comment thread as opposed to the top chat, the comment thread stays around in YouTube. The top chat disappears with the live stream. KRTD Media is rewinding these as essentially live streams. But they are video live streams. So I can be there in the comment thread. So if you want to interact with me in the comment thread, go see the videos again. Okay? Carmen Muniz asks, is Rogan the reddish-haired guy? No, I don't think he's the reddish-haired guy. He doesn't seem to have reddish hair. He's the very muscular guy who looks like he could break anybody else in half. That's the guy.
Tattoos.
He keeps his body in great shape.
Yes, tattoos.
He's got tattoos all over him, too. And Ghost Art says, free Britney. Free Britney. And Lana says, Jim Backer. Lana says, yes, Cuba. KRTC says, I will support sending Bezos and them into space if I can push the button. And Lana says, KRTD, I agree. Steve says, good night. Yeah, good night, Steve. And Kay says, thank you all for another great discussion. But love you all. We love you, Kay. And Steve says, but you guys are funny. KRTD said to me, I asked David Pacman in a super chat what he thinks about Assange today, and he said he doesn't think about him. I also asked him what he thought about the upcoming eviction crisis. He wasn't familiar with it. What a moron.
What?
David Pacman. Alana says, I think Rogan was a professional fighter. I think he was a professional wrestler, is what I heard. Dolores says, thank you and good night, all. And I've come to the end of your comments. So I also will say thank you and good night, all. And if you like, you can join me tomorrow when I believe what's on tap at KRTD Media in the morning is part 3 of my series on state-based MFA. I'm going to do that again tomorrow morning. And tomorrow evening, I'll be doing my regular live stream here. Kay says, Pacman sucks. And Lana says, how could you not be familiar with the eviction crisis? Because you don't give a damn about other people? Lana says, good night. And KRTD Media says, part 3, yes. Good, Shane. Good. Carmen says, good night, Bonnie and Joe. Thanks for having us. It's been our pleasure. Thank you for being here. It really has been our pleasure. And Bonnie says good night, okay, in the background. Thank you all very much for coming. I'll see you tomorrow.